Hey, ladies and gents, and the in-between guests, I'm Jack Existential, back at it again with part 2 of our videos on the hippie movement. Today we're going to be doing the decline of the hippie movement. How did this happen? It became hugely popular and culturally profound in many respects, at least to the extent of bringing about radical social change in the decline in the marriage rates in the US, and of course, with the decline in the Christian establishment in the US. That being said, let's see some events that led to the decline. Now, kicking off on October the 21st, 1967, the March of the Pentagon was a very important event. Now, late in the evening of January 14th, 1967, a few of the people responsible for turning the seventh decade of the century into the cultural movement known as the 60s were lounging in a small back room of the artist Michael Bowen's San Francisco painting studio. Allen Ginsberg sat cross-legged on the floor of 1371 Hague Street, passing a bottle of wine with another beat, as in beatnik, turned hippie, the Zen poet Gary Snyder. Timothy Leary, the former professor remade as the nation's high priest of LSD, was also there, but as was the anti-war activist Jerry Rubin, who would soon join with Abbie Hoffman to start the Youth International Party, better known as the Yippies. So, midway through 1967, Hoffman was looking for ways to push the mostly apolitical hippie movement toward explicitly political ends. A veteran of the civil rights movement through the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, he found one way when he became involved in the National Mobilization Committee to end the war in Vietnam. An affiliated group of organizations, also known as the MOB, at the time, the MOB had begun planning the largest protest yet against the war, a 2-day demonstration in Washington that organizers hoped would draw 100,000 people. At the time, the MOB had recently hired the renowned anti-war professor Jerry Rubin as the Washington demonstration's project director. And the first thing that the Berkeley radical did was inject a little West Coast logic into the East Coast radicals' plans. Initial conception of the protest had begun to occupy the Capitol, but that, Rubin suggested, might send the wrong signal to the public, suggesting that the marchers wanted to shut down the democratic process and thus were offering only more political negativity. His friends behind the Be-In, he told his MOB colleagues, had an idea for a different stage on which to perform their dissent, the Pentagon. Now, even before the Be-In, Bowen had spoken to Rubin. These are the organizers of the movement, and anyone else who would listen about the occult significance of the 5-sided pentagram and the significance that might be inscribed for it as representing evil forces at work in the world. So it's kind of fitting, at least by the hippie logic, that their protests take place at the Pentagon, which in their kind of occult understanding was symbolic of the pentagram, the 5-pointed star of Satan or pagan ritual, which is a bit ironic considering many hippies embraced the pentagram, at least the Satanist side of the hippies. So perhaps there is a bit of a conflicted understanding of the occult foundations of the hippie movement at this time. More than the Capitol, Rubin now agreed, the Pentagon was a natural symbol of the war. As such, it would serve as a far more resonant target. Apprised of this new plan, another voice from the original Be-In, the poet Gary Snyder, contributed the idea that was needed at the Pentagon was not just a protest but an exorcism. Like a mystical arms race, Bowen went one better than Snyder and suggested that the exorcism should include a ritual that would actually lift the Pentagon off American soil and into the air. Time magazine later reported the intention of the proposed ritual would turn it, quote, orange and vibrate until all evil emissions had fled, end quote, and the war would come to an immediate end. So these organizers, Mr. Rubin, Hoffman, and Bowen, all shared an interest in dropping acid. Rubin had first been, quote, turned on in the artist's studio the year before, and Hoffman, by then, was a hallucinogenic old hand. While the first two figures of this acid-dropping trio had no expectations of making a reality out of visions one might have while on LSD, they all were, however, pragmatic and theatrical activists, open to any idea that might bring attention to their cause. As such, they all recognized and respected the power of symbols. So when it came time to announce plans for the protests to be held in late October 1967, Rubin declared that they would shut down the Department of Defense because of the anti-war movement was, quote, now in the business of wholesale disruption and widespread resistance and dislocation of the American society, end quote. So they wanted to, more specifically, raise the Pentagon 300 feet in the air while dropping acid and hallucinating. This was kind of a common feature amongst the hippie rebels, thinking that their LSD trips would, and acid trips, and all these drug-fueled manifestations could actually lead to real change, which we're going to read probably in a couple minutes. That it was kind of mocked by the political establishment, to say the least, and even to others within the movement. It was a bit kooky. Following the artist's journey to Mexico to consult with Cook, Bowen, quote, dropped in during one of our preparation meetings in New York, ready to discuss the logistics requirements of the ritual. The ritual conducted at the Pentagon on October 21st, 1967, was all that and more. After the gathering before the Lincoln Memorial for the anti-war speeches by luminaries, including the poet Robert Lowell and the nation's baby doctor, Benjamin Spock, tens of thousands began to march across the bridge to Virginia. And Mr. Norman Mailer was on the scene for the entirety of the protest and recalls, the smell of marijuana, sweet as the sweetest leaves of burning tea, floated down to the mall, Mailer wrote. When its sharp bite of sugar and smoldering grass pinched the nose, relaxed the neck. Once they had all assembled before the Pentagon, the police and federal marshals were waiting to keep them in the designated protest areas. Organizers distributed a leaflet program for the ritual. Mailer reproduced it in his book, Armies of the Night. Other exciting versions are less poetic, so there are either multiple programs available that day, or Mailer added his own literary flair. Some people likely believed this if that many people were at the protest, because it was not just a protest, it was a protest in the form of a ritual. And that's pretty attractive to these rebellious young people at the time, punks, you could call them. Well, they were probably called that, but more respectfully, they were seriously into spiritual change as a means of creating political change. So on October 21st, 1967, in Washington, D.C., USA, planet Earth, and this was on the leaflet, "We freemen of all colors of the spectrum, in the name of God, Ra, Jehovah, Anubis, Osiris, Tlaloc, Quetzalcoatl, Thoth, Ta, Allah, Krishna, Chango, Chimeke, Chukwu, Olisabulu, Uwa, Imalis, Orisasu, Odadua, Kali, Shiva Chakra, Great Spirit, Dionysus, Yahweh, Thor, Bacchus, Isis, Jesus Christ, Maitreya, Buddha, Rama, do exorcise and cast out all evil, which has walled and captured the pentacle of power and perverted its use to the need of the total machine and its child, the hydrogen bomb, and has suffered the people of the planet Earth, the American people and creatures of the mountains, woods, streams, and oceans, grievous mental and physical torture, and the constant torment of the imminent threat of utter destruction." So they had a makeshift altar before the Pentagon. Meanwhile, a number of competing rituals began simultaneously to unfold. Ed Sanders of the rock band The Fugs delivered an impromptu sexually aggressive invocation punctuated with repeated calls of "out, demons, out." So Hoffman, in this first original exorcism, had his own ideas about the necessary elements of an exorcism. He busied himself pairing up couples to perform public displays of affection that would surround the Pentagon in communal love, while Mayan traditional healers sprinkled cornmeal in circles of power. And Allen Ginsberg declaimed mantras for the cause. Michael Bowen trucked in 300 pounds of flowers and distributed them to the crowd. When military, police, and marshals confronted the protesters, images of gun barrels blooming with daisies became the iconic photographs of the day. While the building never did get off the ground, the ritual inspired by Bowen and his far-off guru, John Starr Cook, in some ways succeeded, particularly as the, quote, witty media project, unquote, of the organizers believed it mainly to be. Bowen's ideas about dark metaphysical connotations of five-sided shapes goaded much of the media into the odd positioning of defending on religious grounds the architectural implications of the Department of Defense. So Christians who were allied with the establishment would start to have to defend the shape of the Pentagon as the shape that housed America's military and security interests. Tough sell for the Christians when defending a five-pointed shape. That's kind of funny, actually. Actually, and expectedly, the hippies are wrong, Time argued at the time. Most religions, including Judaism, Christian mysticism, and occult Oriental sects, find the Pentagon to be a structure connoting good luck, high station, and godliness. How interesting. They're kind of spinning the original pagan belief of the Pentagon. At least according to its organizers, the ritual also contributed to a transformation of perception, a turning point in public opinion about the war. The levitation of the Pentagon was a happening that demystified the authority of the military, Ginsburg said. The Pentagon was symbolically levitated in people's minds, in the sense that it lost its authority and had been unquestioned and unchallenged until then. But once that the notion was circulated in the air, and once the kid put his flower in the barrel of the kid looking just like himself, but tense and nervous, the authority of the Pentagon psychologically was dissolved. So 50 years later, it's rightly recalled as one of the most unusual acts of political theater in American history. Okay, so it's also worth remembering that at least some gathered around the Pentagon that actually believed it would fly. So, yeah. And when it didn't fly, I guess said people were disappointed. Now, in 1968, a year later, this is an article written from that time about the cults at the time that were springing up in this massive flower power movement that was getting kind of aggressive. In its short life, hippiedom has created not only its own language, music, art, and dress style, but even its own religion. Denning it, however, is not easy, since the hippie faith is a weird blend of superstition spirituality that spans continents for centuries. One thing hippiedom is not is Judeo-Christian in outlook. Jesus may be revered as the hip guru of the time who preached a primitive form of love power, but Western churches are generally abhorred by the hippies as irrelevant and square. Instead, they display a considerable interest in the occult, on the theory that the important levels of spiritual consciousness are those that lie beyond man's reason. As quoted, Christ studied the occult, end quote, contends one Los Angeles believer, explaining dubiously that, quote, he learned to walk on water. That's one way of interpreting Jesus. Pretty straight by the book, I guess one could say. There is also plenty of plain, garden variety superstition in the hippie faith, witnessed by their interests in Ouija boards, numerology, tarot cards, palmistry, and mind reading, and astrology. Some communities are very keen on nature worship and hold outdoor ceremonies honoring the onset of the winter and summer solstices. Black magic is very in among some hippies, as is the devil worship. There are even a few witches and warlocks and around Hashbury ready to celebrate black masses and to praise Satan. Insofar as hippie religion is organized at all, it divides into three wings of more or less equal importance. One is the Neo-American Church, which claims an affiliation with the Native American Church, an authentic set of primitive nature worshippers among the American Indian tribes of the Southwest. The connection is not the hippie love of red men, but the fact that the Indians used hallucinogenic drug peyote as a sacrament in their ceremonies. Clergy and liturgy, a second strand of the hippie faith, is Hindu mysticism, as we talked about in the previous video. Writings of a gallery of gurus, Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. We talked about that in the last video. The third source after these gurus that are mentioned here and we talked about in the last video is the Zen Buddhism. And it is promulgated by Oriental scholar Alan Watts, a one-time Anglican priest who lives on a houseboat in San Francisco Bay. So, out of this mystical melange, hippie communities are developing clearly identifiable sects in their own clergy, with their own clergy, formal meetings, and even liturgy. These groups borrow unabashedly from all three strands of the psychedelic faith. The Neo-American Church, those pastors are known as boohoos. The absurd title is meant to keep a, quote, an element of humor, or quote unquote, an element of humor in our institutional affairs, unquote. They use prayers from Buddhism, tantric yoga, and mocassins as pseudo-marriage ceremonies. One popular center of hippie worship is in Los Angeles, in the Oracle Cosmic Joy Fellowship, whose prelates are known as coordinators. As its regular services, worshippers sit cross-legged in incest-clouded rooms, festooned with Indian print clothes, statues of Buddha, and votive candles, holding hands in ecstatically chanting Om, a Hindu word signifying the ultimate religion. Okay, well, capping this article off, confused and eclectic, the goal for the hippies is a union with God, whom they envision as a, quote, cosmic consciousness, quote, end quote. Despite its bizarre aspects, a surprising number of clergymen see the hippie faith as a genuine spiritual impulse. As they said, hippiness has all the marks of a new religious movement, writes Harvard theologian Harvey Cox. In all of the places, the current issue of Playboy, quote, it has its evangelists, its sacred grottos, its exuberant converts. He suggests that the hippies' quest for warmth and love, is a warning to Christianity. Other churchmen quite rightly question the spiritual validity of an undigested mixture of drug-induced hallucinations, skimmed Orientalism, and nature worship. Even Cox concedes that the hippies' quote, confused and eclectic theology contains, quote, very little corrective to just plain self-indulgence. One problem is that the traditional ritual requires the presence of a naked virgin, and there aren't many of them in communal crash pads. Right, now, finally, we get to a movement which many, in retrospect, describe as the final impalement of hippiedom in the 1960s. And after this next movement, this next incident that we're about to talk about was the break-off of the Beatles in 1970. With the Beatles gone and this movement starting to be seen by the public as something short of not something not too far off of naivety and inviting violence and aggression, we get the Altamont Speedway Free Concert. It was supposed to be the West Coast version of Woodstock, which was the upstate New York concert that was like the most massive in American history at the time, and 100,000 people or something like that went to Woodstock. Children were born, people got married, and it was pure insanity to many who were there. I mean, the event was so big it was insane, but we're going to talk about this movement on the West Coast that was a bit brutal. And it was hosted by the Rolling Stones. The violence... Okay, so we're going to get to that. The festival was meant to bring the radical counterculture of the 1960s to a glorious end. So they knew that the whole movement was on its way out. So they wanted to just cap it off with something that would be kind of fun and just cool. But instead, the festival that meant to encapsulate the summer of love from a couple years before ended in tragedy when 4 people died, including 18-year-old Meredith Hunter, who was stabbed by a Hell's Angel. What led to this disastrous show? Basically, bad decision-making. And instead of hiring private security, the Rolling Stones, at the recommendation of the Grateful Dead, decided to hire the Hells Angels as security for the show, with just giving them free beer. The band, the Rolling Stones, wanted to make the magic of Woodstock, which was the iconic 1969 New York Music Festival, to the country's West Coast. In autumn of the same year, the Stones felt inspired to organize just that. What they didn't do, that Woodstock's organizers did, was plan ahead. The idea for Woodstock was conceived in January 1969. This meant that the team responsible for assembling what's being called as the single greatest live music event in history had nearly 7 months to plan and prepare for it. So there's Mick Jagger and Keith Richards at the Altamont Music Festival. On the other hand, the Rolling Stones tried to whip up the Altamont Free Concert in a matter of weeks. The venue wasn't even sorted out until just a couple days before the festival was slated to occur. Local business owner Dick Carter offered up his Altamont Speedway as a venue at the last minute because the production team was pressed for time. They were unable to set up the stage properly, making the venue unsafe for both performers and attendees. But the concert did promise iconic artists such as Santana, Jefferson Airplane, the Flying Burrito Brothers, and Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, and through at the expense of safety and preparedness, though at the expense. The arc lights weren't set up above the stage. Instead, they were propped up in boxes. In addition, there wasn't enough time to set up a barricade between the crowd and the stage. All the Altamont concert used was a thin piece of rope to keep concert goers away from the stage. So Keith Richards says that had them, the Hells Angels, at the suggestion of the Grateful Dead, we had them, as he's trying to say, they arranged for the bikers, spearheaded by Hells Angels leader Sonny Barger, to work for all the free beer they wanted, an offer they happily accepted. From the very start, the gang's presence was unwelcome by both festival goers and musical acts. The disorderly Angels were rough and often used a, quote, take no prisoners approach to their security efforts. One gang member knocked Jefferson Airplane singer Marty Balin unconscious in a scuffle, but the concert continued. While the Rolling Stones would be headlining set for the night, the band wound up making headlines for all the wrong reasons. So 18-year-old Meredith Hunter was excited to attend the Altamont Speedway free concert. After he had experienced the love and positive energy at the Monterey Jazz Festival offered, his sister Dixie warned Hunter that he shouldn't go. Hunter went anyway. Although he did bring a gun, he recruited his girlfriend, Patty Bredehoft, and the pair took off to Altamont. So they were surprised to find themselves in a sea of utter chaos. They witnessed some Angels practically gunning people over with their motorcycles, beating music fans with pool cues, and generally inciting violence. After staying the afternoon at the concert, the couple retreated to their car. Bredehoft was ready to leave, but Hunter convinced her to go back in for the headlining act. Okay, so there's our guy, I suppose, Meredith Hunter. Little did Hunter know that a song by the Rolling Stones would be the last one he'd ever hear. The band finally appeared on stage. Lead singer Mick Jagger acknowledged the craziness that was happening right in front of him, and he said, "There's so many of you. Just keep cool down in front and don't push around. Just keep still, keep together," he pleaded with the crowd. But it was mainly his own security causing the trouble. So Hunter climbed on the makeshift speaker stand to get a better glimpse at the band, and he was at the front of the stage by now, and at his feet of the band on camera. And, as under my thumb was playing at the time, the Hells Angels swarmed the crowd. One of them pulled at Hunter to get down from the speaker, but he fought back. So, long story short, one of the gang members grabbed at Hunter. Hunter was fighting him off, but more Angels joined, and Angels chased him, and Hunter's girlfriend pleaded with him to drop the gun because Hunter had brought a gun, but it was too late. The Angels surrounded him. An Angel named Alan Passaro stabbed Hunter twice, taking him away from the crowd. They stabbed Hunter at least 4 more times and kicked him in the head and chest repeatedly. So this man's girlfriend finally caught up to her boyfriend, and he was at the mercy of the Hells Angels. Bystanders attempted to save Hunter's life by tending to his wounds and carrying him to the medical tent. Unfortunately, their efforts were futile. So in the aftermath of this tragic incident, most of the incident was captured on video and featured in the rock documentary Gimme Shelter by brothers Albert and Maysles, which is largely regarded as one of the greatest rock documentaries. So this made national headlines. A radio station took calls from Altamont concertgoers to share what they'd experienced. One of the Hells Angels that attended surprisingly called in, and he described the type of security the Stones paid for. And this man said, "I didn't go there to police nothing, man. I ain't no cop. I never gonna pretend to be a cop. This Mick Jagger, like, bleeding put it all on the Angels, man. Like, he used us for dupes, man. And as far as I'm concerned, we were the biggest suckers for that idiot that I could ever see. And you know what? They told me if I could sit on the edge of the stage so nobody would climb over, I could drink beer till the show was over. And that's what I went there to do. But you know what? When they started messing with our bikes, they started it. I don't know if you think we pay $50 for them things or steal them or pay a lot for what. Ain't nobody gonna kick my motorcycle. That's what happens when I guess this is what happens when the counterculture movement becomes so abrasive to traditional police that they hire literal gang members just to spite the police, and this is what happens. So, in the aftermath, not only, there were also accidental deaths of 3 other attendees who were killed in hit and run, and another by drowning, allegedly while on drugs, trying to enter the concert via shallow irrigation canal. So, aftermath, the FBI, it was revealed by the FBI that the Hells Angels put a hit on Mick Jagger to avenge the chaos at Altamont, and Mick Jagger, blamed the motorcycle gang itself. It comes to the question, who really is to blame? The Stones for their ill-preparedness, or the Hells Angels for their incitement of violence? It was certainly practically the end of the hippie era, and it kind of left a stain on the movement of hippieism and hippiedom. So that's basically where we come to an end at our analysis of the hippie culture and the hippie youth movement. It was born out of a youthful need for something different, and it became so spiteful and so aggressive and so radical, despite the fact that they advocated for free love. And that did come out of the movement, but it was built on very, very shaky foundations with drugs, LSD, and a shallow understanding of this philosophy. So, there you have it. Hippiedom. Hippies. The hippie era. What could have been an organized movement that was disciplined is ultimately left for history. So, that's it. See ya.